Hello and welcome back to the studio. Today's painting is yet to be decided really, and that's the problem sometimes us artists face. We have half an idea, more than one painting in our head. We're not quite sure which one to pick, and we end up picking one and then going maybe a bit off the rails with it. But I've got half an idea. This is a Bob Ross classic called Country Creek. I can't even remember the title as usual. Anyway, let's see how I get on with this painting, but it promises maybe a few surprises. That's the other half of my idea. We'll see what that materialises as. Anyway, I got my cup of tea, so sit back and relax and see if you can make head nor tail of what I'm about to do. This could turn your painting world upside down. So here's my canvas, 16 inches by 20. I painted it with some black gesso last night and left it to dry. I'll be starting off my painting with some of this Bob Ross liquid clear oil paint. This is a wet on wet oil painting technique. I use it from a small airtight container for ease of use. I keep it in the freezer. That's right, it stays quite nice in the freezer. I'll be using two Bob Ross 1-inch brushes, a nice new one and a slightly older one. I'll use the older one for the liquid clear. I'm also using a liner, a filbert and a fan brush. The filbert, well, we'll see. And I'll also be using a Bob Ross palette knife. So let's use that old 1-inch brush just to really scrub this on nice and thin. It's important that you put on a very thin, even coat. When you test it, you want to just have a small trace on your finger. I'll leave a link to a video how to use it in the corner. I'm also going to be using this brush again, so I dry clean it very well on a piece of paper towel. I've got a fresh dry brush here, my nice new brush. I'm using just a little bit of Prussian blue and a tiny little bit of some titanium white. I forgot to show you my palette. I'll show you it later on. In the majority of the canvas, I'm going to be using phthalo green and some black. I want a very deep forest green colour. I'm going to fill in the area beneath the sky. But it's hard to tell where you've been. So I use my fingertips to get a sample. As you see, that third one, well, a bit too much oil and not enough colour. I want it to be really dark green. I work this colour in right to the edge of my sky. Next I'm going to use some sap green, Van Dyke brown and just a little bit of white. I want to make a sort of a nice sort of foresty green colour, but a little bit on the light side. I'm using my nice brush for this, and as you can see I'm grooming both sides of the brush very well. This is a slightly different sort of fir tree and one that I don't normally teach, so we'll be learning together. I start off by just tapping in the centre line. I want to know where the tree starts and where it stops. And add another little centre line, just using the side of the brush, just pressing gently on the canvas. They look a bit too regular, so I'll add a few more sort of leaning trees. Right, they need a bit more bulk, so I'll just press a little harder and let the bristles sort of splay out and create the illusion of some nice little side branches and limbs on my fir trees. Right, I think they're about done. Probably add a few more into there, but I think that's it for the minute. Right, I tap and open up my brush. I want to use just the very corner of it. I want to add some little bushes at the base of these trees. As you can see, I tap downwards, allowing the brush to splay open, creating lots of little bushes. It's a little bit bright. I added a tiny bit more white to my mixture. You can see that really jumps off the canvas now. Maybe a little bit of cadmium yellow for variety as well. Let's give that a try. Yikes, that really is bright. This is one of the things you've got to be a bit careful with. When you're using black gesso canvases and you're adding highlighted trees and bushes, the smallest amount of white and cad yellow could be really quite bright. Let's add some rocks, Van Dyke brown and a little bit of black. I mix it together well and pull up a little roll of paint on my palette knife. Let's tuck one in here. It's just press it in place and just sort of stain the canvas with colour. I'll give him a little friend. Maybe we'll add some more as well across the base of the canvas. Just like a mountain, I want to scrape out some of the surplus paint. For a highlight, I use dark sienna, some of my Van Dyke brown, and maybe a little yellow ochre. I lay the two dark colours either side and the light colour in the centre. And then I blend them together a little bit. This is a marble mix, but don't overdo it. I said don't overdo it. I said, okay, let's see how that looks. Take a very small roll of this paint and just touch it gently to the rocks. Very gentle pressure. You want this paint to almost break like a miniature mountain. The colour's a little bit off though. See, by over mixing it, I've got this sort of funny caramel brown colour. Really wasn't what I intended. So here's my painting so far. And I think it's fair to say that, well, there's a few issues here, aren't there? I think my trees in the background in this section here are a little bit sort of too regular, nice and evenly spaced. And to try and compensate, I made a few crazy shaped ones that really don't work too well. I then tried to over highlight these bushes here, and that's a common problem when painting on a black background, is that just even the slightest amount of white or cadmium yellow in your highlights and they become sort of almost fluorescent. So that's something we have to be a bit more careful about. And these are probably not my best rocks. I've done them better than that. So there's some issues with this painting, but what can we do? My first reaction is probably just to pick up a palette knife and start scraping. You've seen me do that before. Someone suggested using it as a firelighter. It's probably got some merit there. This will burn like billio. But maybe there's something else we can do. So let's play a little trick on this painting. See if you can guess what I'm going to do next. Let's turn my painting upside down. With firm brush strokes, I can turn these awful looking trees and funny looking rocks into some reflections and start again. I've dry cleaned my nice 1-inch brush and I'll start over again with the sky. A little Prussian blue and just a touch of white. I don't want this to be too bright and luminous. And I'll now start in the top right hand corner so it sort of fits in with the reflection in the bottom right corner. I want to blend this out well until it bumps into the edge of my green. That already looks better than my first attempt. I'm going to carry on with this nice new brush and I'm going to go into some Van Dyke brown, some titanium white and a little bit of the sap green. But this time I'm going to be very careful not to make this too sort of green or too bright. And I'm going to pick my positions more carefully. Just going to touch the edge of my background sky and see what my colours are like. I think that's just about as bright as I can get away with. And again, gentle touch, a little bit more pressure towards the base of the tree to get a nice sort of shape. As I mentioned, I don't often paint these trees, so the little bit of practice the first time round was quite useful. As you can see, I've avoided painting them too regular, too straight and too even this time. Yes, try to make sure you vary the shapes and sizes to look more natural in your own paintings. We're creatures of habit and we like to have everything nice and level and straight. I'm using that same mixture, but I'm going to tone it down with some Van Dyke brown. And starting sort of at the furthest point of my sort of background bushes and trees, I want to test my colour. Not too bright this time. You saw the impact of putting white and cad yellow into your colours can have. Everything just turns so bright. And that's just about on the limit for my painting. Keep it sort of more subtle this time. You can always add more highlights, but it's a devil to try and get rid of it if it's too bright. As you see, it fills out very quickly in the background, and don't overdo it. It's easy to try and overstuff your paintings. Now for some rocks. A palette knife or a filbert brush? Today, a filbert brush. I'm going to load this very well with some black and Van Dyke brown. Both sides of the brush. I want it to be like a sort of soft palette knife effect. You can use a brush just like a palette knife, especially for small rocks. As you can see, I've left some nice little dark areas, and I want to be careful with my scale. Not too big and not too small. I've got a little dark area there I can squeeze a little rock into. As you look at my painting, you can see I've left some little obvious places to tuck them in. Here's another one, and there'll be some more as well. My top tip for painting rocks is don't try and do too much with them. I think we look at a rock as an opportunity to go a little bit over the top with highlighting. I do the least amount possible. So I start with some Van Dyke brown and some dark sienna and maybe a little bit of grubby white, or yes, maybe some ochre. But whatever you do, don't over mix it. Pull one into the other and then leave it alone. Scoop up the paint on your brush. That was the trouble with the first lot of rocks. They were just over mixed and sort of caramel. Notice how lightly I hold my brush. Finger and thumb pressure is perfectly acceptable for adding highlights on rocks. The colours stick very well. The harder you try, the worse it gets though. I leave a lot of dark. I can always come back and add more highlights, but once again, once it's over highlighted, you're in trouble. And you'll soon be scraping them out and starting again. And that just ruins the spontaneity a little bit. I sometimes like to do this. Add a little burst of highlight on one little rock. That's like a little feature, like a little jewel in my painting. Now, I want to add some grass in this area. I left a gap between the rocks to bring the riverbank through from the background. I planned ahead for this. Planning is key in a painting. I already know where the waterfall's going to go. I planned for that as well. I'll keep tapping and adding some of this lovely grassy texture to my painting. This will enable me to get the highlights to stick a little easier. Now, with my nice brush, I'm going to add a small amount of cad yellow to my mixture. And as you can see, I'm holding my brush with the logo visible. I want to load the highlights on just one side of my brush. If you load it on both sides, the bristles tend to clog. Now, the light's directly through the centre of my painting, so this is probably the brightest spot. As you can see, I tap at about 45 degrees to the canvas, and I want to get this lovely speckly effect. I want to follow the lay of the land from the background to the foreground. I find it's quite important to make the land fit to the shape of the rocks. That's another one of my little top tips. Make sure your rocks actually fit into your landscape. They shouldn't just be sort of stuck on, they should look like they're really part of the painting and part of the landscape. As you can see, I'll take the colour right across under these rocks and vary the colours. I think I need a little change. I'll go into some yellow ochre and then back into my original colour. Small shifts in colour really help your painting stay alive. The green can become a bit samey otherwise. There, that looks a little bit nicer. And again, I'll take some of this colour right up to the base of my rocks and up between the rocks as well. I'm going to use my fan brush and I'm going to go into some of my mixtures of green and maybe add a little yellow ochre to the colour as well. I want some small bushes here and I test my colour against my canvas. I just sort of hold it in place. I think I'll try tucking one just in here. I'm using the corner of my fan brush and a little upward pressing stroke to create some foliage here. Don't overdo it though. Save a little dark here and there. It helps to add character and atmosphere to your paintings. I'm having too much fun with this painting. I think it's time to stop doing the background and start working on the water. I've got a second fan brush and I'm going to use it to mix up some grubby white with some Prussian blue and a little touch of black. I want quite a grey colour for my water to start with. Again, I can make it brighter, but it's tricky to get rid of the highlights. I've loaded my brush to a chiselled edge, and again, remembering where the light's coming from, I start with just a little touch of colour, just to test my values, make sure they're not too bright. I also want to be careful about my angles. I don't want this to look too steep. If it's too steep, it'd be more like a torrent rather than a nice creek. I just let my brush meander across the surface of the water. Don't try too hard with this. Just let it follow its own pattern. And then, choom, time for a waterfall. I'd planned the position of this to be directly under that little tree in the background. And another little stroke there. I want everything to be sort of lined up with the tree and the bright area in the sky. And another little stroke coming up, zigzag, and choom, little half stroke here. And again, just think about how the water would run and bump over rocks. There's tons of reference photographs to look at on the internet and use them to inspire you. Now on the lower level of water, I add some more little zigzags. I'll also go back in and add some little splashes. I just use little upward strokes just to create a little bit of movement on the water. Save that little shadow under the riverbank. Otherwise the water will look like it's coming up higher than the land. Time for some more rocks. Van Dyke brown and black on the filbert brush. You can see now why I left a few little holes here and there. I can't stress this enough when you're painting. Try and plan ahead a little bit. Think about your painting as a series of chess moves. You want to see where you're going to be playing the next move, so do a little bit of planning ahead of time. I might even tuck a few little rocks under the riverbank on the other side. I've got my highlights here again. They've got a little bit muddy and a bit overmixed, so I'll refresh them slightly. But once again, don't overmix them. Keep them nice and marbly. Super light touch. Again, the light coming from the very centre of my painting, so more on the top of these rocks. That's the cat flap. That's Henry Cat going out for a walk. Touch. Let the paint break and do its own thing, and don't try and fix it. It's not broken. There. I think that's probably just about as many rocks as I can squeeze into this painting. I finished them off with a few of those little upward presses that I used to create the little bushes in the background. I think that's about as much as I can do with the water again. This is very much a painting that's easy to overdo. The background, the highlights, the rocks, the water. So it's a good one for you to learn a bit of self-control. The other thing you can learn to do is keep a tidy palette. Sometimes your paint just gets in such a pickle, it's easier just to wipe it all off and start with some fresh paint. I think I've ruined too many paintings with a grubby palette in the past. I've got my dark green brush still to hand, and I'm going to go back into my black and phthalo green colour. I want to make up an area of land down here in the bottom corner. This is to hold in my creek. I start off by just dabbing the brush and getting, again, some positions organised. I want to know how big it's going to be. There. Along this top edge, I do some upward presses with the brush just to create some nice little sort of broken, sort of grassy effects almost. Once again, this helps to push my waterfall into the background. There. That lovely textured paint will help with my highlights. But I also want to add a bigger fir tree. I go through the black and green colour with my fan brush this time. Now this isn't particularly easy to see because I'm painting a dark tree to start with on a dark background, but I know I don't want it to get any wider than about here, so I'll put a little mark on the canvas. I'm using little pressing strokes pushing up with the brush to create an underpainting for this fir tree. Apologies in advance, I got my big fat hands in the way as usual. Never mind, I've done lots of other videos where I painted fir trees. I'll leave some links for you to watch how I did it a little better in those videos. Now, with my second fan brush, the one I highlighted the water with, I'm going to go back into some cad yellow, some yellow ochre, a little sap green, and give it a little push. Create a little ridge right in front of the edge of the bristles. I'll be highlighting mainly the right hand side of my tree first, and that's a little on the right side, so I I think I need to calm that down a bit. I'll use a special blending technique for that in a minute. But yes, that colour's just a bit too vibrant for this painting. I'll darken it down with a little bit of black and phthalo green. Now, let's blend that out a little bit at the top. I've got a special tool for that. It's called a finger, and I just tap and let some of the dark green colour mix in a little bit. Now for some proper highlights. Again, using my fan brush and just a few little upward pressing strokes, I want to add the suggestion of a little highlight to probably about 1/3 of my tree. The vast majority of my tree will stay dark and in shadow. Certainly on the left hand side, it wants to be very dark. I let my brush run out of paint as I reach the bottom of the tree. If you enjoy watching my videos and want to support the channel, don't forget, give me a like, that's a thumbs up, leave a comment, and you can even subscribe. Time for a tree trunk. A little bit of grubby white and a little tiny touch of dark sienna. Again, marble them together and pick up a very small amount on the small blade of the palette knife. Look for some nice dark areas through the midline of this tree, and just here and there touching a little colour. Don't forget, not too bright, so that one at the top there is probably a little bit too much of a zinger, so let's go back and just retouch it. There, that's better. I'm going to add some highlights to these bushes, and again I've dry cleaned my nice 1-inch brush. You'll notice that one side of the brush is slightly rounded. That's the side I usually take through the paint first, so I'm dragging my brush through the paint rounded side first. You can see what happens. I press and open the brush up, and it creates a lovely sort of lacy effect in the paint. Give it a little press. There. Now, rounded side to the top. I'm going to go in and gently press and leave a little imprint of the bristles. Top tip, don't let the bristles slide on the canvas. You're leaving a little imprint of the bristle tips. If you let the brush skid, it'll look like long sort of shaggy grass. Every time I press, I leave a little tiny dot of paint from every little bristle tip. There, do one little bush at a time, and don't get in a hurry. Stand back, have a look at this from the other side of the room. These first little bushes look a little bit under highlighted, so I go back in with a little tiny touch of bright colour. I'm careful not to overdo it though. It's easy to become a mud mixer. Now, time to finish off this water. I've gone back to my fan brush with a little bit of that grubby white paint on it, and I just want to sort of let the water shimmy down into the shadows under the bushes. I'm going to brighten up my colour with a little bit of yellow-green, just to indicate a little bit of a reflection of the bushes in that rippling water. So here, just a touch. Just let some of that colour bump and run and jump across the surface of the water. So there you have it, Country Creek, another Bob Ross classic. This one saved from the bonfire. See how you can change your paintings with some creative thinking. But don't move, there's another video coming right along, and this one's got some nice fir trees in it for you. Happy painting, people.